The era of the 60s was a period of seizures. In the second half of the 60s, young people began to fight against the conservative government, social conformity of the 50s, and the military intervention in Vietnam. This created a counterculture which led to the social revolution. Two different groups of revolutionary young people were against the US government. On the one hand, student activists who took part in social riots were gaining increased political prominence. They began a massive movement made at churches and universities. In the famous sit-in, the students gathered outside the university and spent the whole night talking about the world problems. One of the student-led organizations was Students for a Democratic Society, focused on schools, and it was also important the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which fought against racism and for integration of public schools across the US. On the other hand, the other youth movement that appeared in the US was the hippie subculture, which quickly spread to other countries.
The hippie movement started in San Francisco, California, and spread across the United States and Europe. Its best period was in America. During the 60s, the hippie impacted America with their way of life. The early hippie ideology included the countercultural values of the Beat Generation. They used to create their own social groups and communities, listened to psychedelic music, were against the Vietnam War, supported the sexual revolution, and used drugs such as marijuana, LSD, and magic mushrooms to explore alternative states of consciousness. Hippies' most famous moments were the Summer of Love in San Francisco in 1967 and the Woodstock Festival held in New York in 1969. It lasted 3 days and was attended by lots of people. There weren't enough sanitary facilities for everybody. Governor Nelson Rockefeller called festival organizer John Roberts and told him he was thinking of ordering 10,000 New York State National Guard troops to the festival. Roberts succeeded in persuading Rockefeller not to do this.
Moreover, music was used to express protests. Bob Dylan's lyrics were created to let the public know of what was happening in the world. His lyrics contributed to a new wave of anti-war protest in the 60s. Maggie's Farm is unquestionably one of Bob Dylan's most timeless and universal protest songs. Bob Dylan's imagination and energy with words is what made him famous. The Beatles also had a big influence in UK society as a musical group regarding clothes and music. They became very popular and rich. Beatles really represent what happened then, the fact that the wages were higher than before, working people had better standard of living. They had more free time and began to go on holidays. People started to own their houses, cars, etc. Because of that, young people began to question authority and traditional values. That's why the older generation was afraid of the challenge attitude of young people that question politics and traditions. With revolution, they didn't refer to an uprising of the revolutionary groups, but stressed the importance of changing and revolutionizing things in a non-violent way.
Another important fact that mainly represents what happened in the 60s was the African American civil rights movement. This asked for the end of racism towards African Americans and the voting rights in the southern states. In 1966, the Black Power movement wanted to include racial dignity, economic political self-sufficiency, and freedom for oppression by white Americans. From 1955 to 1968, acts of non-violent protest produced crisis situations between youth activists and the US government. These protests included boycotts like Montgomery bus boycott in Alabama, sit-ins like Greensboro sit-ins in North Carolina, marches such as Selma to Montgomery marches in Alabama, and a wide range of other non-violent activities. Due to the civil rights movement, in 1964 was written the Civil Rights Act banning color, race or religion discriminations and established the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Immigration and Nationality Services Act of 1965, and the Fair Housing Act of 1968. African Americans re-entered politics in the South, and across the country young people were inspired to action.
During these times of fight to gain more civil rights, also there was an anti-war movement. For the first time, many people thought the US intervention in the Vietnam War was a mistake. US government sent around 500,000 American troops to support South Vietnam, and it ended with lots of death. This produced that many Americans, students overall, protested the involvement of the US in Vietnam at the end of 1965. After that, a mass movement began rising in opposition to the Vietnam War, going out to the streets. The shooting of 4 anti-war students protesters led to nationwide university protests, and then riots broke out. Some military veterans joined Vietnam Veterans Against the War as a protest of military abuse. In 1969, more than 2 million people participated in the Vietnam moratorium protests around the country. Militant protests over oils continued to spread, leading many Americans to wonder whether the war was worth a split society. The anti-war movement ended with Nixon's measures to blunt the movement, withdrawing US troops from Vietnam after the Paris Peace Accords in 1973 and eventually ending drop calls.
This is the dawning of the end.